Thank you, Taylor, and welcome everybody. I want to thank our panelists today, two advisors, Eric Rabbanian and Beth Ann Johnson, for joining us and being really willing to share some of their experiences with Income Lab and how they have presented different plans they've created there. This is one of the webinars that we get the most requests for. And so I'm really excited to do this. My goal here is that we can provide some really real world examples of client presentations. So hopefully we'll kind of hit the right mix of high level, but also, these are real situations where, they've been anonymized, but they will have their quirks, as every situation does. But the goal is that other advisors who use Income Lab and those who are considering Income Lab can see how to talk about retirement income planning with their clients in sort of the framing that Income Lab gives you around adjustment-based planning and tax smart distribution planning and income adjustments and income risk and so on. So that, hopefully there are some nuggets, some concepts or options that you can pull from this for your clients. We'll try to make this relatively conversational. Sometimes when we're mocking a meeting, it can seem a little bit, contrived, but I think we'll hit it right today. So introductions, we have Eric Rabbanian from Rabbanian Financial Planning. And Eric, I thought I'd start out for both of you just by asking kind of what your experience has been with Income Lab. How long have you been using the software? What kinds of clients have you found it helpful for?
So I've been using the software for a couple of years, but a good portion of that has been me, kicking the tires and getting really comfortable with it. And in that process, I've gotten really excited about what I think it represents in terms of what I can bring to clients. It's been most useful with what I'll call simpler cases for me so far, but that's because I'm, still riding the learning curve. I actually feel like I'm beginning to land in that. And one of those is the case that I presented just a couple of weeks ago to a client that I'm going to illustrate here.
And Beth Ann, how about you? How long have you been using Income Lab? And I guess what's kinds of, Beth Ann Johnson from Worth Asset Management. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. How long have you been using Income Lab, and what is the breadth of cases where you've found it useful?
Well, I had large company background and had great financial planning tools. And when I left to go independent on my own and started searching for software, I identified Income Lab, and I was a very early adopter. And I saw a lot of great things in it, and it's actually matured so well, and I've enjoyed using it very much. So thank y'all for all that you're doing with it. And in the period of time, in the very early, I was able to actually win a very significant large client from one of the big firms that I'd previously been with. That was a strong relationship because I was able to pull everything together all in one place, and simply having a report tool such as basic as the balance sheet, going to that, and him realizing that I could be, the quarterback for pretty much everything that he had going on and coordinating it. So that was a really big win, and I attributed that to the software tool that, and I've since used it, for just some very basic elemental cases of why do you want to invest a little bit more aggressively when you're kind of behind the curve on your asset level, and your spending level is not something you want to adjust, and things like that. But this case that we're doing today, I'm excited about because it is, one that's very significant. I've got a client anyway that we'll get into, but early adopter, and a little over 3 years, I guess. So.
Right. And yeah, I think we've got a good mix today because Eric is going to go over a case a little more focused on the retirement income planning side, adjustment-based planning, and so on, and looking at some of the tools in the software there and how he has presented them. And then Beth Ann will focus on a case involving tax smart distribution. So it's a really nice mix. So with that, Eric, would you mind kind of setting up the situation, and then we can go into how you have presented the case to the client.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, before I do that, I want to add a little something. Beth's response to your last question made me think to your question of whom is, or what kind of client is this best applicable for? And it's really any client that you want to answer the question of how much could I spend? Because Income Lab provides a mechanism that allows you to answer that question more specifically with more actionable items. So I'm looking forward to using it for all my clients, and I'm on a roadmap to do that. So this particular client is Linda. She's 80 years old, recently divorced, like just a few years ago. Fastidious, a little bit intimidated about investments. She has a conservative nature and is extremely charitably inclined. In fact, she's been very clear that she's willing to reduce her spending. She doesn't want to reduce her commitment to charity, which has stayed even at $3,000 a month among 3 charities. So that's the intro, and I'll try to present this as if I was talking to her, with occasionally the idea of breaking the wall if I've got something worth sharing. So Linda, I'm really excited to look at your plan again, particularly because you've heard me talk about some new software that I've been using that I'm really excited about using. It's called Income Lab, and I really think it represents an evolutionary advancement in retirement planning. And the reason I say that is because historically we used something you may have heard me call it Monte Carlo analysis. And that was really great for showing this variability of returns, what your investments could get, and how that can impact us. But one of the drawbacks to it is these projections usually assume a fixed spending level. And they run all these projections looking at, okay, if you continue to spend at that rate, adjusting it for inflation, what would happen to your portfolio? And what they don't reflect is the real life reality, which is that you're likely to adjust your spending. Most of my clients do, based on what's happening. If the market does really well, your portfolio's up, there's a tendency to spend a little more, and to want to spend a little more, and to be able to. And on the flip side, if the portfolio comes way down, there's a tendency to tighten that spending a little bit. And what the software allows us to do is reflect that by saying, okay, what would I in that situation recommend spending wise? And if you were willing to make those adjustments, what would that mean for spending over the life of your plan? So it effectively models reality better. We're really doing that on a year-to-year basis or whenever we meet, but now we get to project it better. And part of the reason we're able to do that is simply advancements in technology and computing power. So let me share my screen with you. And in that process, I want to kind of go over a few of our inputs. So I've already put in all of your assets that you have, the accounts that I manage, and also your income coming in from Social Security and your Percy pension. Made all the updates from what we've already talked about. We've put in the charity as a set aside expense, so we know we've got that covered, as well as your Medicare expenses. And there are a couple of areas where we get some flexibility in the inputs, and I just want to make note of those right now. The first is for your initial spending level that we're going to list as desired. I'm using the number that we used last year, and we'll see what the projections suggest. Okay, quickly breaking the ball for advisors here. I've got her on a flat income path because of her age. If I had a longer plan, I would probably have a discussion about the retirement smile spending, the idea of go-go years, the slow-go years, the no-go years in retirement. In this case, I won't address that or wouldn't address that here, although I have looked at it myself. The other two settings that I want you to be aware of is longevity. And I'm assuming that you're going to outlive 80% of your peers. So we're taking a conservative approach in that regard. And then this last one is income setting. And what we're saying there to the program, and you'll see I've got this set on conservative, is, hey, let's plan for the idea that we are never going to have to reduce income or the amount that you're able to spend. And let's see where it takes us. And so when we do that, we get an output that looks like this. The first thing is here, we've gathered all your assets. I illustrate that for you. Here's all the assets at Schwab and the held away assets that make up part of this projection. And then the screen part I really want to focus on is this spending capacity. And this is telling us what the projections suggest under all these assumptions that you could spend. And if we click into a little more detail, it's suggesting that you could spend about $5,800 in addition to the set aside for Medicare, and then increase that with inflation, making adjustments if needed. And so what would that look like? Well, for that purpose, I want to flip to this screen. So here we are. This is with the amount that you pay for Medicare. And so it's suggesting you could spend in total about $5,900. And that's with your asset base at 1.7 million. If that asset base were to go up, and if we were doing the projection today and asking, hey, has it gone up enough to spend even more? What I would tell you is it would need to increase 10% or up to 1.9 million. And if that happened, I would come to you and say, hey, you can actually get an increase. And instead of spending $5,980 for starters, let's bring that up to $6,600 a month. On the flip side, because we've taken this conservative approach, your assets would have to drop 746,000 or 43% before I would come to you and say, a spending adjustment is recommended of $290. And so part of the reason it's such a small spending adjustment is we've set ourselves up for this more conservative approach that I referenced before. And the idea is over time, we will look at how the portfolio is doing. And ask ourselves, have we hit this ceiling or upper guardrail, which would suggest time for a raise in spending, or have we hit a floor? And otherwise, we're just going to keep on going with an inflationary adjustment. So that's the protocol and the idea behind it. And there's a couple of ways we could look at testing this. And one is, how would this plan have done in prior market environments, particularly in really poor ones? And we call this the retirement stress test. And so this outlines 5 particular market environments that over the years were really challenging for investors. One is the Great Depression. We've got the stagflation era of the 70s, the global financial crisis, and so on. And so, for example, in this plan, if we started with that 5,800 or so in planned spending, we see that represented by this light blue area. This is our planned spending over the years, increasing with inflation. And if we had actually started in April of 1929, before the Great Depression, and we don't know that that's what we're headed for, but if that's what had happened, then we would see that your income actually a few months in gets a bump up. And I would come to you and say, you could actually spend $6,580. And that would carry it forward for a few years before it would actually drop. And I would suggest a spending down to 6,070, still above our initial planned amount. And so you can see there's many years where wherever you see a green line, that's a bump up, and a red line is a bump down. Over the whole breadth of this experience, the whole life of the plan, even with these bumps down in later years, we are above the amount we planned. And what's happening with each of those adjustments is we're hitting a guardrail. So down below here, under balance and guardrails, this blue line represents, in this experience, what your portfolio would have done over that time. And the green line represents that ceiling or upper guardrail at each one of these points in time. And the red line is the lower one. And remember, we started off conservatively, so we're up around here initially. And so it's not until those few months in that we hit that upper guardrail, which you can see right here, that you got that increase. So this illustrates over time, in one of the worst investment environments that an investor could have experienced, that we would have been just fine with this kind of spending. And that gives me a lot of comfort. In fact, it's not just true for the Great Depression. We could also look at stagflation, time of high inflation, malaise in the country. You may remember the gas lines. And we see the same thing. You got actual increases because we started off conservatively. And so even when there were drops, you were above what we had planned. Okay, so that's if we look at how the portfolio would have done over time in over specifically challenging market environments. But we could also ask, what would it look like over the market as a whole, over the history as a whole? And so I thought I'd already run this, but sometimes it brings me back to what's called test this plan. And so this is where it takes a little bit of time. And what Income Lab is doing right here is it's solving one of these. It's running through lots of projections, taking each point in history, starting back in the 1870s and saying, if this was our plan starting in retirement of this month, and we ran along this protocol over the life of the plan, and then it says, let's do it again with the next one. And it's looking at every plan period over going back to the 1870s for this length of a plan that's available. And we see that 97% of the time, you would have gotten to spend at least what we initially planned. And 3% of the time, it would have been a little less. And when it came to the types of adjustments experienced, you'd see that we had on average a 6% bump every 6 years, and you only had to take a cut in your spending capacity every 15 years. And then we could also ask, okay, what kind of spending did you really get to do over the life of the plan? And so I like looking at this screen because, we could say from this that this plan historically would have provided you the opportunity to spend not just the 5,800 or so that we saw, but over time, $8,400. That would have been the median outcome, the average outcome. And even if you look at some of the weaker outcomes, we see that your average spending was above our plan. Now, there were some years in some of these worst case scenarios where the spending is below what we had planned. In the bottom 10%, it is below. So it's not without some risk, but that's true for any plan. The other thing that I know you have expressed as important to you is leaving some kind of legacy, even though we haven't really defined that and we've left that a little bit open-ended. And we'll see on average in this plan, in today's dollars, you would leave a legacy of $500,000. And even in the lower performing outcomes, it would have been 300,000 or so. So it gives me a lot of confidence in this plan based on the goals that we've talked about. But I do want to give you something else to consider here, and that is coming back to this idea of the stance we take on how conservative we are. We started off very conservative. This is an example of where your power here is your flexibility in spending. If you tell me, Eric, I'm willing to reduce my spending or take a slightly higher risk that I would have to reduce my spending, then I would say, that's great. That flexibility is your power, and it gives you the chance to spend a little more on the front end. And what that would look like is, this is that range of outcomes of how conservative on the left to how aggressive a stance we could take. If we just slid this over a little bit, not even halfway, this is what the spending and guardrails would look like. And instead of including the Medicare spending, instead of spending $5,900 a month, the projection would allow you to spend $7,300 a month, about a 24% increase in spending. And notice, you're still closer to this upper guardrail than this lower guardrail. So let's take a look at what that would look like. And I'll bring us back to, let me share my screen so we can compare these. So on the right here is that plan with the higher spending. And when we look at there's two ways to test this. One way, we could look at it in, how does it look in tougher market environments like we did before, like the Great Depression. So originally we were talking about spending about $5,800, and we saw increases along the way, decreases, but always staying above the blue. With this one, we start off at a higher amount, and then because it is the Depression era, excuse me, let me get into Great Depression. We do see a few years in, instead of bumps up, we see bumps down. But even when we bump down here, we're at a higher amount. The 6,080 that would have occurred a few years in, we're at a higher amount of spending than you would have been on this plan. We could also compare, so quick aside, advisors, I'm ripping through this from time, but I would probably go through this a little bit more with the client. Okay, we could also compare how this would look testing the plan. So let me put both of those together here. And remember, in this original plan with a very conservative bent, we were very likely to be able to spend above plan. Here, there's a slightly greater likelihood, but still 90% of the time we're able to spend more than we expected. The adjustments would be a little more frequent on the downside, but still a 6% adjustment on average every 7 years. And then if we look at the overall life of the plan, we see in the median example, you get to spend over the course of your life $9,437 a month in today's dollars versus $8,400. About a 12% increase in experience of what you're spending. And this is true or similar in the 25th percentile case. But the worst cases are a little bit worse, which is what we could expect. Similarly with legacy, the legacy is a little bit less in this scenario, which is what you would expect because you're getting the use of more of your assets over time and through your life. So there's a trade-off here. And I'm actually comfortable with both of these plans if you're comfortable with them. I'd like us to probably stay on the left side of that range that we looked at over here. And so I will stop there because I threw a lot of information at you, and I bet you have a lot of questions, some of which you probably would have asked along the way.
Eric, thank you. This was awesome. And that what you were doing there with the comparison side by side, I thought was really powerful. There actually is a new feature that launched today that'll allow you to do it on one screen in the stress test. So that'll be cool.
Nice.
What did I know this was a real client. What did the client decide to do from these options? What sorts of questions did she ask you?
Yeah. So what? So in terms of questions she asked, she did ask about legacy, and so I illustrated that here. And then she also made the comment when we talked about the opportunity for more income under the moderately conservative case of, God, that, I want to do some more things with my family, with my children, and it's nice for me to be able to have the money to be able to spend on that. So this idea of getting to enjoy the money that would otherwise be their legacy, or some of it, with them while she's alive, seemed to resonate for her. I expected her to go a little bit more towards this base plan, but in the end, she went about 25% of the way there. So instead of a 24% bump in spending, it was more like a 5% bump. And that came because she pulled a round figure of, in the end, she gets the money to spend this through cash that we have her sent from her Schwab account. And she picked a nice round number for that. The other thing that was telling is she is this idea of what I think this illustrated was, well, let me back up. I actually asked her for feedback on what she liked the most, what made an impression. And she said for her, it was the retirement stress test. For me, it's this test plan more generally, because I like to think probabilistically, or try to. But for her, it was looking at how it would have done in really poor environments. And then lastly, what she offered, I didn't prompt her on this, was this: I can't thank you enough of how happy I am that you are here looking at these things and then going over it with me. And I'm trying to understand it as best I can, but I know you do. And that's just client glue. And it also, I had a little lift in my step for the rest of the day because I had a client showing appreciation over something like this. And I know it sounded like an Income Lab commercial at the beginning of my discussion of the Income Lab being an evolutionary advancement, but that is how I honestly feel. And so my geeking out about this comes naturally through to my clients, I think, and they like it. At least that's my impression.
I'm looking through some of the advisor questions here. Just
Sure.
We'll pick one or two and then give Beth Ann a chance to go through her scenario, and we could always take some more of these later. I did think it was interesting and maybe worth commenting on that, the plan didn't have a legacy goal, but you mentioned that she did, kind of have a undefined, I'd like some money to be left over at the end. And I like how you noticed, hey, even when we didn't specify, we put it at 0 on those scenarios, you did have money left at the end. So somebody was asking about, is this a spend down plan, or are we trying to conserve principal? From a just technical standpoint, I can say that's generally how these work. So even though you have a 0 legacy goal at the end of the plan, the software is not assuming that the person has passed away or that we know exactly when they'll die, right? If we did, then of course you could land on 0, right? So it's trying to represent like, hey, if you're 10 years into this plan, we're pushing it out, right? I mean, if she's 95, it's going to continue going for a while there. So that's why there still is a balance in all those scenarios.
That's one of the things I think that's been challenging for some of my clients to get is this idea of, okay, if we say, for example, here with the idea she'll outlive 80% of her peers, takes her out to a 17-year life expectancy. 10 years later, your life expectancy is not 7. Because at 90, the possibility of outliving 80% of your peers takes you past 97. And you don't want to run out of assets.
Yeah. Yep. That's great. There's some other questions. I think I'll try to hold them to the end. I don't want to take all the time away from Beth Ann. So, but we may return to some of this. So thank you, Eric. That was really great. And also I thought is interesting because I don't think there's enough out there in terms of examples of plans and planning for, people other than sort of this prototypical, we always use this person in their, 60s or something. If you read articles, including mine, they often are 30-year plans and so on. I think some points you made there about some little differences, right? Like maybe you're less likely to use the SMILE at that point, the age-based, because probably wouldn't see a huge difference, but the whole story is a little different than when you're in your 50s or 60s. So I thought those were nice little points. Okay, Beth Ann, I know you have a very different plan and one you're actually working on right now that keys in a little bit more to the tax smart distribution planning side of things. And I think you'll have to unmute. Let me see if I can do that. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to set up kind of what the situation is, and then maybe run us through a little bit of how you think you may present this.
Okay. The situation on this client is a couple, and they have taken early retirement. They have nice means from an asset-based standpoint, and they've never used an advisor, so they're test driving me, so to speak. They're anti-fee and anti-taxes. So that's just net. So being able to do this to me is ought to pay for the fees for the next 20 years is the way I look at it. So that should hopefully alleviate some of their angst in multiple different ways. And so they were aggressively, because of seminars that they've been to, hearing about Roth conversions and having to pay tax on, all the higher Medicare cost, tax on Social Security, et cetera. They are very intent on aggressively converting all of their 401 IRAs into Roth. So much so that they've got close to $1 million. And so much so that they were thinking about telling me just the most recent time on the phone last week that they were going to do it. The reason they had so much cash in the bank when we reviewed assets here was to pay the taxes for the conversions that they're going to do in 2 years. And that just was such a gut to me of, is that really necessary? That I asked them if they would want to explore, optimum options for that transfer that could accomplish their reducing taxes, but not overdo it. And for them to see it, rather than me give them a suggestion, let's see what the software will support in giving them quantitative data that they can work with before they get that aggressive. And so that's the setup for doing this. And I'm actually seeing them this evening and showing them this. So this was a great exercise and practice from my standpoint. So thanks for the opportunity. And one of the things that I will typically do, first of all, just caveat in before, and I'm using this to start with the client, is just to kind of review. And I like all of the assets and things that's, is this still all accurate and such when I meet with them, and show the Life Hub. I think that is a picture's worth 1,000 words. And that really does it. So I'll go into the Life Hub. Is my screen being able to be seen at this point
No,
in full?
no, I'm not. We're not seeing a shared screen yet. So
Okay, share screen. Is it there?
there we go. Yep.
Okay, good. Is going into Life Hub and just reminding them that we've got, the income side here and showing, they're not taking Social Security yet. They were talking about doing a, portfolio withdrawal originally of that. But then overall their assets, and the investment accounts, banking and other assets. I go to the investment accounts and I review, in your IRAs that you've got this amount, does all of that look accurate as we had discussed before? And I gained their agreement that all of this is. So we want to look at, what you've told me is that you want to be very aggressive in converting your IRAs to Roth so that you're not paying as much tax later, and it's going to save you money on your Medicare cost when you're going on Medicare in 4 years. So I gain agreement there. And so then I'll say, and given that, what we really want to look at is some of the scenarios and not let me determine it or someone else tell us what we need to do, but let's let the computer go through all of the data points to be able to pull this together based on where the taxes are today. We can't project anything for the future, but it statistically will give you some very good evidence on what works best, given the information that we have today. And so on an income scenario, we're looking at the other thing too, we're looking at your desired spending level is only right now it's $8,000. But one of the things I wanted to represent is for you to have a comfort level that you have the capacity to spend more. So that's all that, I'm sharing here, but, and your proposed income is 8,103, or your 8,000. And so what we're really going to look at is from a income scenario, we go to the different plans, and you wanted to aggressively do 300,000 on this year and next year on your Roth conversions. So what we'll do is we'll look at the tax center, and in that tax center we'll select that in the next 2 years you convert 300,000 a year of Roth, and we look at that, and what that shows us is a tax strategy of your spending on taxes total, because you're wanting to pay the least taxes you can, of $562,670. Now, in addition to that, I have put another option in here. And so what we'll do is look at the income plan or the income scenario where we have a 5-year conversion. So rather than in 2 years, we're taking the entire amount, the $955, and we're breaking that into $191,000 a year to get all of it done. And so we go to that plan and then look at the taxes here. What does that tell us, this 5-year conversion on the tax plan? And over that 5 years, we've gone from the previous 562,670 to 495. And so we'll just go ahead and hit, the comparison of that. On strategy 1, we had the 2-year conversion, and we're using the optimal, which it shows us what to do, where we're taking the least amount of taxes. Pardon?
Are you trying to find where to put that second one in there, Mary?
I am, right? I'm gonna.
So hit edit
edit and go to
Strategy.
strategy 2. And I'm using now this second strategy of the 5-year conversion. And right now, the optimal, it tells me, is this bracket. And I save that. So here we can see the differences of the total taxes of taking your 2-year 300,000 immediately over the next 2 years. So what this allows you to do is save taxes by using a longer term conversion. And in the end, you're still gonna, it doesn't affect your spending level. It allows you to have a greater net income. Well,
So-
I mean, you'll have a little bit less originally, but again, over time, it's gonna, I mean, you don't have any legacy goals, so that's kind of a moot point. But does that help you in seeing that you don't have to be quite as aggressive on your Roth conversion strategy and you can still save money on taxes? So that it's pretty evident there. Is that, any thoughts on that?
Well, since you are presenting this evening, my my normal questions of what sorts of questions did they ask you and what options
Yeah,
take, I think maybe we'll just think about it. I did
they
also,
haven't asked the questions yet, so I really, they're excited to come in, and I rarely get, this is only the second time I've had them in the office, so
yeah.
they wanted to see this.
I'm also curious so I know you created these specifically to allow, 2 years of Roth conversions and 5 years. I'm curious, and maybe they won't like the option because they are so interested in rapid Roth conversions, but I'm curious at what, if you take all the handcuffs off, just kind of let the Roth conversions happen in any year, if there's another strategy that's even
More optimal.
Yeah. But I
did try a 10-year, and I went to the Explore, and where's not the Explorer, the in the tax, I went to advanced edit and tried 10 years yesterday.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember how I got there.
Well, let's go over that, because I think some of the folks on the call may not know that this is even
It's possible. Yeah.
So, if you go back to really any plan, and I'll show you where the advanced settings are. Well, not the implemented one.
Not the implemented one. Okay.
So if you go to the 1, 2 years and 300,000, I think.
Okay.
The setting.
And then I come in here to the 3 dots, and I will do advanced settings.
Correct. Yep. And then in
And
tax.
then I'm going to go to the taxes, and I'm going to specify years, and I am taking out enforcing, but I'm customizing here, and I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is what I did.
Gotcha. So this is where, just for the audience, this is where you can get fancy like this and kind of say, okay, which particular years will I allow Roth conversions? And, Beth Ann had the 300,000 case there as well, if there is a number that clients are focused on as a maximum. Whereas if neither of these boxes are checked, then the software just allows Roth conversions in any year where there's available space in the bracket, and also where there's funds that could be. So I guess we'll have to be continued on sort of
To be continued on the questions and the response. Yeah, but no, this is fabulous. This is really great. And it didn't, I saw, on the Medicare, it did give an estimate on it. and you can change the variable expense. So that's one of their concerns. They're paying, I mean, it's not going to be any different. They're spending $8,000 a month now, and they're paying for health insurance, which would not be any more than Part B and D at the highest level on Medicare. So,
Beth Ann,
yes.
do you think once you present this to the clients, there's a possibility that they will see the opportunity to enjoy more of their money and spend more?
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, they are very, I mean, they do a lot, but they also have some expected long-term inflow. So I don't know what they're gonna, I think what it could also show them that they could spend more money, or they could do some, they're gonna have, you know, in 15, 20 years, they're gonna have some serious tax planning complication, you know, challenges. So.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I
To
know.
have that reality so that they are feeling free to spend more and do more.
I know it showed with no Roth conversions and so on, just kind of that core plan, I think was, you know, quite a bit more than 8,000 a month. So
It was, yeah, somewhere around the 12, 14,000 a month. So without any Roth conversions.
Yeah. That said, I have noticed also, you know, when there is a big gap between what someone could spend, so their spending capacity, and what they are spending, and maybe you can't get them too excited about spending more.
Uh-huh.
That actually is a decent opportunity for Roth conversion conversation, because it's sort of like, well, how are we going to spend that surplus? Well, you could spend it on Roth conversions.
Yeah, I mean, now's the time, spend it on Roth conversions, and then you're accomplishing your goal of paying a lot less taxes. And hopefully by me sharing this with you, you'll have a little bit more comfort that know that, you know, some professional services is at least worth $66,000 over the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I have the Roth. And so all that other stuff is elsewhere. So they're, anyway, and they're the ones that want to convert to Roth. So.
And just to ask one of the questions from the field, is this is a prospect there, like you said, they're kind of, you know, shopping. Would this be a long-term client, or is this a one-time project that you did for them?
No, they're a current client at a small capacity,
Got it.
at a small level, which has much greater capacity. So my goal in doing this for them is to build value overall, so that they don't feel so bad about paying a 1% fee on when they thought they could do everything themselves.
Right. I'll hit a few of the questions really quick. Somebody asked about IRMA, which it sounds like they were concerned about that higher Medicare cost. And someone was asking whether the software takes into account the 2-year look back. It does. In years 1 and 2, it uses year 1, because, you know, we don't ask what things were 2 years ago, but otherwise it is in there. And we could probably find a place to show where that is true. Let's see here. The one with the most upvotes, and I guess this is for everybody, including Derek, it was about entering expenses.
Their entering of expenses is, if you went in here, is this what they did is they looked at their credit card bills for 12 months and divided it by, I mean, and added it all up and averaged it out. So that's how we did on the expenses side. And the baseline was, that was what their baseline spending was made up of. And then, so we did try to, you know, I pushed them to add some other expenses, like an extra 5,000 a year on something with the house on an average, and then, you know, baseline taxes right here.
I like that credit card approach, especially if they're almost all their spending is that way. Eric and Derek, this was Ryan was asking kind of, how do you approach entering expenses? And I think this is also a place where this can trip people up with Income Lab, because the first, we actually don't require you to put in any expenses. So have you run into issues there? What's your approach?
Well, so for me, I try to keep it broad and avoid getting into too much detail on expenses, except for planned set-asides. So like with the client, with Linda, there was the charity. She knew that's high priority. And one of the nice things about Income Lab is I can label that as a variable set-aside expense. So it's taken out of the equation you saw on how much income she could spend, but it also treats it as charity. And so the idea of a qualified charitable distribution, because she has an IRA, she's more than 70 and a half, is automatically factored in. Beyond that, I just let them know, hey, here's the total amount you could spend, and it's up to you where you're going to spend that. Or if we know spending is going to be a certain level, like this client ultimately said, hey, I want to spend that much, we can do a solve for. And I'm still not going in and specifying, hey, this is how much you spend at the store, or utilities, that kind of thing. That's sort of a separate, okay, if this is how much you want to spend, let's look at where you spend, a different cash flow exercise.
I see the full range of that from spending. I have a client that's the highest high net worth client, and he has his categorized in an Excel spreadsheet. He gave it to me and I inputted it for him. I mean, I inputted it into the plan in full detail that he had his house taxes, his landscaping, his etc. I mean, and he spends a lot of money, but he has a lot. So it's all factored in there with that under the baseline. And then the variable is, over the next 20 years, how many times do you think you'll buy a car? Or how many times so you can set aside those large amounts in there on every, on one of them, I'll have a car every 10 years. We've got 50,000 in there for every 10 years as a variable.
I would say my philosophy is pretty similar in that I'm usually trying to keep my plans pretty simple on the expense side, as much as just kind of core expenses going in as the baseline, but then any, somebody knows they're going to fund a wedding or something like that, that's a unique goal and a cash flow that's going to come up. I definitely do want to build that in. I do have some clients that I kind of let them build out the plan a little bit more on their end. And that is one area where it's probably just, I need to sharpen some of my own skills on the expenses and how to put things in and all that. But I would say that if you're doing that with clients, just make sure you feel comfortable with it, because I have run into just different times when it's like, oh wait, tracing all those expenses through different parts of the plan, and how does this impact here and there. It can make the plan presentation a little bit more complex than at times I've just felt like they've kind of lost. They're spending all the time trying to track down this one detail that really in the grand scheme of things is not that significant. And it kind of drew attention away from just the high level guardrails or overall approach. So
yeah,
that's just one caution if you do get too deep, but I probably need to get better at that area myself.
Yeah. In other software that I've used, it was, the core expenses average, what's the net number you need to pay for living expenses. And in this case, we're only spending $8,000 a month. Okay, we'll use that 8,000 as a net number. Is there any big expenses? So I kind of do keep it in a broader sense, and so that people don't get into the weeds, but I do challenge them to think through what is the reasonable spending levels that they need to maintain to have the same without having to change in lifestyle.
This has been great. We have tons more questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to them. For those who submitted questions, and we have your if you sign up email and so on, we will respond over email to those.
One thing, Justin, if I may, just want to let Eric and Beth Ann know that we did receive a lot of feedback in this chat and Q&A about how wonderful of a job you did, and they thought you did fantastic. So our community is supporting you and telling you how wonderfully you did presenting. So
Well,
nicely
thanks,
done.
Taylor. That's appreciated.
Hey,
Hope
Justin,
it was of value.
yeah, same here. I am happy to chat with anyone. Like I'm happy to share my email because I love the idea of being part of the Income Lab community that's, you know, supports one another. So if there's other users out there that want to share how they do something or want to ask me how I did something, you know, I think that just makes the software all the better. So I want to put that
And
plug in there.
I'm the same, Eric. So I would like to have a new a new collaborator on occasion. So
Well, we will get those shared. Justin, we did have one thing that Eric did, the side-by-side comparison, and we did have a new release today. Justin, you want to touch on that just for a brief minute?
Yeah, so this was last week we did our Lab Talk Tuesday where I went over this, and it didn't get in the software in time for Eric's presentation. Well, technically, I suppose it did, but it's certainly not in time for Eric to get used to it. Within the stress test, the retirement stress test, you can now find a comparison option. It's in the upper right. I'm trying to pull up an example of this right now that I can share with everybody.
Bear with us, and for those folks who stayed on, they get a sneak peek.
So I'll share this right now, real quick.
Don't tell anyone, it's double top secret.
So it's in this upper, the upper right here, which you just see the, you know, one box versus side by side. And then what you'll get is if you have more than one plan, now I just created this really quick, no idea whether it's any different. Okay, very slightly. You'll get, this is maybe a little better. I just made a copy of the plan and I had it be more aggressive. Maybe the Great Depression will show a difference. You know, not a lot to write home about on this one, but I have created ones that differ a lot more. So Eric, what you were doing with those lines, you would be able to see them all on one screen, and it will show, you know, that the current plan will still be that light blue and dark blue, and then, you know, the mustard, I guess here is the other option, and so you'll be able to see side by side the differences in plans. So I think that's going to be, I'm really looking forward to some of the comparisons out there and people playing with different portfolios or different income settings or, you know, things like that. And I think your example was perfect, Eric, of just, hey, here's the trade-off, right? You could spend less and have a very smooth, probably very few down, you know, reductions in spending, unless you've already gone up and you're just pulling back, versus ones where, hey, you know, you're spending more, but there are situations where you'd end up a little lower. So hopefully that'll be helpful for everybody. But yeah, just to echo Taylor, amazing feedback. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the chat or the Q&A. Really appreciate it. I know this really is it's a big deal to spend so much time preparing and presenting. So the community, I'm sure, really appreciates that, and we'll share this out with everybody.
thanks, Justin and Eric and Taylor for organizing.
Yeah.
And your feedback, Derek.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.